Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show, a lot of very exciting hemp news at the top of the hour. Then our interview this week is with Joe Evans, chief petitioner, proponent in Idaho for a marijuana legalization and medical marijuana legalization bill in the state of Idaho. So we'll have Joe Evans on here in about 8 or 9 minutes. But first, let's bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
All right, our first story tonight is from our federal government. The U.S. Department of Justice has published a proposed rule in the U.S. Federal Register to reclassify marijuana from Schedule 1 of the Federal Controlled Substances Act. Cannabis has been classified as a Schedule 1 controlled substance since the creation of the Controlled Substances Act 54 years ago. By definition, Schedule 1 substances possess, quote, a high potential for abuse, no currently accepted medical use and treatment, and lack of accepted safety under medical supervision, end quote. This proposed rule seeks to, quote, transfer marijuana from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substance Act to Schedule 3 of the CSA, consistent with the view of the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, that marijuana use, as well as HHS views about marijuana's abuse potential and level of physical or psychological dependence, end quote. Publication of the proposed rule begins a period of public comment which extends through July 22nd. Comments may be submitted electronically via the federal e-rulemaking portal using the reference docket number DEA 1362. We favor descheduling rather than rescheduling, but we understand that reclassification is associated both symbolically and with tangible benefits to the cannabis community, both in the short term and the long term. Interested parties also have until June 30th or 20th to request legal hearings to further debate the issue. HHS's recommendation to reclassify marijuana are not binding upon the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. However, the agency must continue to accord HHS's scientific and medical determination significant deference throughout the administrative process. Historically, the Drug Enforcement Administration has rejected every prior petition that sought to remove marijuana from Schedule 1. Across the river in Washington State, some purchases of medical marijuana in Washington State will no longer be subject to the state's 37% cannabis tax under a new law taking effect yesterday, Thursday, the 6th of June. The exemption signed into law by Governor Jay Inslee applies specifically to products that have been certified to higher testing standards than typical state legal products. Medical marijuana card holders were already eligible for exemptions from Washington's sales and use taxes on cannabis, but they were not exempt from the state's excise tax, which is one of the highest in the country. One of the bill's co-sponsors, Representative Shelley Klaba, also sponsored a cannabis home grow bill this session, the latest in a series of such measures introduced over the past several years, but the proposal ultimately died in committee. Over in Europe, Germany's government's moving forward with the second phase of marijuana legalization to create a pilot program for commercial sales through the administrative process, rather than having lawmakers pass a separate bill to enact the reform, as was initially expected. Marijuana legalization was implemented under a bill that the Federal Ministry of Health spearheaded and went into effect in Germany at the beginning of April. So adults in Germany are now able to possess and cultivate cannabis in addition to joining cooperatives They're expected to launch in July, where they can access the plant. But there's no current commercial framework for sales. The laws already in effect also provide regulatory discretion to build upon the initial reform. That is, the federal German Ministry of Agriculture is empowered to establish rules to create commercial pilot programs so adults can buy cannabis in certain jurisdictions without any additional legislative action. And now from Africa, South Africa's president signed a bill to legalize marijuana possession and cultivation by adults last week. President Cyril Ramaphosa gave his approval to the Cannabis for Private Purposes Act last week, just one day ahead of national elections in South Africa. The National Assembly passed the legislation last November, and the National Council of Provinces signed off in February. Lawmakers have emphasized that the measure does not permit for the lawful sale of cannabis. Adults will need to grow their own plants, and they could only consume it in their private residence. Similar to South Africa, Mexico's Supreme Court ruled back in 2018, more than 5 years ago, that marijuana's criminalization is unconstitutional and gave lawmakers a mandate to revise the laws. The reforms advanced in recent sessions, but is yet to be enacted. With the new presidency in Mexico, maybe the new president will sign that, push it through. From South Dakota, voters will decide on a marijuana possession measure this fall. The South Dakota Secretary of State's office confirmed that supporters of the proposed statewide ballot initiative legalizing the possession, use, and cultivation of marijuana turned in the requisite number of signatures for the November ballot. The measure will appear on the ballot as Measure 29. November's vote will mark the third time since 2020 that South Dakotans have weighed in on the issue. In 2020, a majority of voters decided in favor of a broader ballot measure legalizing marijuana possession and retail sales, but the Republican Governor Kristi Noem then challenged the measure as unconstitutional. Justices on South Dakota's Supreme Court eventually ruled 4-1 to strike down the law, opining that it violated the state's single subject rule. Also this fall, Florida voters will decide on a constitutional amendment permitting existing medical cannabis facilities to engage in adult use marijuana sales. Because the ballot proposal is in the form of a constitutional amendment, it requires approval from a supermajority of Florida voters, 60%, to become law. In Ohio, regulators today had applications available for retailers who wish to engage in the licensed sale of cannabis products to adults. Here today is June 7th. Lawmakers last month gave final approval to allow for the expedited sale of adult use cannabis products by existing medical cannabis dispensaries. Voters in November approved a citizens-initiated measure, Issue 2 in Ohio, legalizing the possession, home cultivation, and retail sales of cannabis for those aged 21 or older. Provisions in the initiative called upon regulators to begin issuing retail licenses by late 2024. And our last story tonight concerns the attitude toward cannabis across the country. Nearly 7 in 10 registered voters favor legalizing the recreational use of marijuana on a national level, according to nationwide polling data commissioned by Fox News. 69% of the respondents, including majorities of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, back legalization. Only 30% of respondents opposed it. The percentages are consistent with those of other recent national polls, including a 2023 survey by Gallup. That's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. Let me tell you, if you are a loved one, are looking for help locating a doctor who can qualify medical marijuana patients, we have a referral service. Just give us a call at 503-235-4606. Our number here, 503-235-4606. And now here is our interview. Help us and work to restore hemp. Good night. I'd like to introduce Joe Evans in Boise, Idaho. Joe, you want to tell us about, you've been working to legalize medical marijuana and advocate for marijuana law reform in Boise, Idaho, and across the state of Idaho for a number of years, right? How How long have you been doing it? What's the name of your organization?
I've been participating as part of the community for going on about 8 years now. The organization that I'm working with at the moment happens to be Kind Idaho. And the purpose of Kind Idaho is, of course, legalization or decriminalization of nature here in the state. We have so many great things out there that we understand are beneficial to the human body that are currently illegal, but they're literally plants you can grow in your own home or in your own backyard. So we've been focused on patient advocacy, working on getting medical marijuana available to patients here in the state of Idaho for 4 years as Kind Idaho, and
That's
we're
hard.
getting ready to take the next step.
Yeah, that's hard given the law there. Idaho is one of the only states with no medical program and no, of course, no recreational program.
Right?
Do you want to tell us
But,
about the law there?
well, a lot of it is our legislators, and our legislators have this belief that they're responsible for the temperance of the citizens of Idaho. So they're really big on the tough on crime aspect. They really want to put people in prison for doing things they consider to be intemperate, such as the use of marijuana, various other medications that we use on a regular basis in order for people to be their best selves. When you reach a point where what you've been getting from the doctor just isn't doing it for you, the petrochemicals that they load you down with, and you find your natural opportunities or you find your street opportunities, and then you find out that you're a criminal for using them. That's one of the big things with our big shift towards uh, criminal justice reform, especially with regards to the war on drugs, as well as ensuring patient advocacy. Because at the end of the day, we still need to make sure our patients have the medicine that works best for them.
I know the biggest dispensaries in Oregon and in Washington are those that border Idaho. And so the biggest ones apparently are right across from Boise, about 25 miles in, what is that? Ontario.
Ontario, Oregon, yes. Now, Ontario, Oregon is responsible for 10% of Oregon's legal sales. That is $3 to $3.5 million in product that's sold, to Idahoans. Nobody in Ontario buys because they all grow it there. They take home, clippings from work, which means that the only people spending 3.5 million in Ontario every week happen to be people with Idaho license plates.
Right.
So it's really bizarre, this marijuana tourism that we've created in Ontario. It's been a real boon to that community. We fund their schools, we fix their roads, an awful lot of things we got going for them over there. And they really do appreciate the taxes we pay for the marijuana and the cannabis products that we purchase just across the border. As far as benefiting from tax money, that isn't being taken from the residents of an area, Ontario loves us.
Certainly, certainly. So let's talk a little bit about you. You and I are both military veterans. I have a 30% disability rating, and were you in Iraq or
I spent 4 tours over there, and as far as where I've been, it's a little bit everywhere. I
in
did 3 in Afghanistan. I did 1 in Iraq. I was in the Philippines for a while. I was actually in Korea when the towers fell. And I've been around a couple different places during my time in the military. I'm 30% disability myself. A lot of that has to do with kidney cancer. I had a radical nephrectomy in order to remove the cancer from my body. Been cancer free for going on 6 years now. That, yeah, as a result of whatever it was they want to call this latest thing, 30% disability for the kidney cancer and the surgery that came with it.
you around those burn pits that they talk about, and they've recently expanded the disability ratings based on that.
Well, if you were in Afghanistan or Iraq, you were near a burn pit. Sooner or later, you were close enough to one. Kandahar airfield in Afghanistan. It wasn't a burn pit, but you smelled that. The open air water treatment facility. That was right in the center of it, and it was, ooh, yeah,
But
a lot of rough smells over there.
you apply to increase, given the new change in that law, you should apply to increase your disability percentage. Mine's also 30%, which isn't shabby. But I think given that recent ruling, but so you came back as a veteran, and tell me how you got involved in the marijuana movement.
Well, a lot of it was just coming back in activism, getting involved in nonprofit organizations, sustainability, trying to find a particular niche where I could continue to serve in a positive way in my community. And one of the big things that stuck out more than anything else was how many veterans, like you and I, who were using cannabis, for to treat symptoms of post-traumatic stress injury or traumatic brain injury, or many of the other things, pain management, for injuries while in country, bullet wounds, whatever it takes. An awful lot of veterans find that medical cannabis, you know, ibogaine, uh, psilocybin, these are all things that have been proven to be very versatile in treating a number of conditions that veterans come back from war with. You get into the communities and you start recognizing that, you come back and it's not just the veterans who are finding benefit in this. You have individuals who are suffering childhood trauma, complex traumatic injuries, stress related. And you see all of them being able to find an advantage, find a way to heal and recover. And more than anything else, become a contributing member of their community again by being able to access this medicine and being able to take advantage of what it does for them, both uh, physically, emotionally, and intellectually.
So how did you come to, I have a lot of experience, as you now know, in terms of initiative politics. I first moved to Oregon to work on a marijuana initiative in 1984. And uh, that's another story. But I know the tribulations and the hassles, the fundraising necessity that's involved in doing a statewide initiative. Uh, Tell us how you came to. Obviously, it's been the main route for legalization, both medical and recreational, nationwide so far. It seems unlikely that the Republican-controlled legislature of Idaho is going to do anything. They're not
Right.
going to do anything. Uh, what do you think? How did you become involved in the initiative? Kind Idaho's.
A lot of it was the opportunity created. Now there was Treasure Valley Coalition or Citizens Coalition community that was doing it 4 years, 6 years ago, and every 2 years they need to find somebody who's willing to be a co-sponsor, willing to step up, willing to take the lead on it. But they're running into a situation where they wanted to run two petitions that year. So we ended up with two different organizations. We ended up with Kind Idaho that was focused on the medical aspect, while the individuals who were focused more on going the recreational route were working on basically a legalize the drive bill, which would allow people to go into Ontario, buy and be able to carry, certified product from Ontario back into Idaho, sort of half stepping the program or creation of a medical or even a full recreational program by creating a way for basically people to be safe driving across the border and coming back. Yeah, so, but we stepped in because my big thing is, of course, patient advocacy. I want to make sure that patients have access. I want to make sure that that level of health is available to so many people who need it. So that comes back to where we were, how we marketed, and how we pushed. And the other advantage is Jackie, with her concerns, with her issues, not only with her daughter who has brain cancer, but her own personal issues with regards to traumatic brain injury and rheumatoid arthritis from a significant car accident that she was involved in. That was our big thing.
And so you're talking about Jackie Winters, the
Yes.
this that you work with at Kind Idaho. We were able to meet just a month ago on May 11th at the Boise Hemp Fest, where you and I were both honored to address the crowd from the band shell there. It was a great event. Lots of vendors. It looked like the vendors were doing really well. And but it's a one-day event there. The next one's, I guess, going to be May of next year, right? So
Right.
but I met Jackie there as well, and Jackie came highly recommended by several people here in Oregon as well. And
Yes.
so I know when we met there, we talked about the initiative, and you said part of the problem was the length and the detail, and showing that to people, and have to have it somehow attached to your petition drive. You want to discuss that?
A lot of it is when we were doing the medical, it was a very expensive proposition because we were, it was 20 pages, of normal 8x10. And when you're trying to figure out the best way to conserve signatures, how to do the printing, and you realize that legal paper is going to cut down on your cost of printing, but it creates a problem with individuals being able to print off their own. So when it comes to a medical program or even a recreational program, in order to do it the way most states are going to accept it, involves a very hefty stack of paper. And Idaho insists that every signature sheet be accompanied with the entirety of the initiative. So we were looking at 7 pages, 8 pages front and back of legal size paper, and it just became prohibitive.
Yeah, that's very
What was that, Paul?
that's very expensive.
Oh yeah. But we continued to work, and of course we ran into several roadblocks. One is during COVID, a lot of the money for petitions and initiatives and the efforts to legalize dried up. The continued issue of failure here in the state of Idaho, of course, made certain people reluctant to continue to invest, considering the amount of money that had already been spent to get essentially nowhere. So it's like we got hit with a 1-2 just at that particular time. And we were trying to reestablish credibility as a community, as an organization, and focus on the effort. That's where, we did our time now. We put in the 4 years, we ran the circulation. We now have individuals that are actually interested in, helping us through the next stage of things, especially with everything going to Schedule 3 right now, particularly for medical cannabis, cannabis in general. Now that it's going to Schedule 3, people are looking at it and going, well, what are our options? How do we want to set this up? How do we decriminalize cannabis in the state of Idaho in such a way that everybody can take advantage of it? So we've set things up. We're currently working with one of our lobbyists here in the state. We have things set up. They're working on a decriminalization initiative. This is going to be personal use and home cultivation, right? You can grow your own, you can carry a certain amount on your person at any given time. And one of the things that so many people in the state of Idaho love about this, because, decrim has about, for personal use specifically, has about 80% support here in the state. We had 74% support, or sorry, 68% support for a medical program, which is pretty good for an initiative. As long as you can get the word out and as long as you have the volunteers to make it happen, it's excellent. And of course, we only had 40% support for a recreational program. But with us moving forward on a decriminalization, one, the thing that scares so many people about the marijuana industry, the cannabis industry, is that the industry moves in. All of a sudden there's grows, there's the clippings, there's the cash only businesses in the reluctant parts of town, that allow them to actually set up and operate a dispensary. And so by doing this, one, we create a hobby market here in the state of Idaho. Two, people who still want to drive to Ontario are capable of going and just coming back without worrying about being arrested for possession on their way home from their purchase. Three, those people who are actually patients and using their marijuana medicinally under a doctor's supervision no longer need a card. They no longer need to be on a registry in the state of Idaho. They no longer have to check in with Department of Health and Welfare to see whether or not their prescription is still being able to be maintained. They no longer have to worry about acquiring a record that's associated with marijuana possession or cannabis possession, that again reflects with child protective services or, legal right to own a gun, constitutional right, to own a firearm. By going the decriminalization route, we're able to secure all of those for our residents in perpetuity. They're able to use their medicine of choice under a doctor's supervision without exposing their usage to the larger government watchdog organizations, because now they're doing a registry that they have to file with the state, which is still subject to, Freedom of Information Act polls, where you don't have to deal with that when your doctor's doing good things for you, and you're doing good things for you because you're using it under supervision. You're using it in a way that benefits you. You're using it in a way that makes him look good because you're healthier, you're better, you're smarter, you're faster, you're more productive as a human being. It's better for everybody all the way around. It's better for the community that you live in, that you participate in, and it's better in redeveloping a professionalism in naturopathic medicine here in the United States. You're able to see and benefit from all of these advantages.
Yeah, I appreciate naturopathic medicine. All three of our children were born at home with naturopaths, which doesn't work for everybody, but it worked for us.
Right?
So with the advent, well, let me digress just a moment. I've been doing this a long time, and you have too for the past 8 years. And just in that period of time, we've seen the head of the United States Senate and Chuck Schumer and the head and Cory Booker and Ron Wyden of Oregon, head of the Finance Committee in the Senate, say they're going to legalize marijuana. And they said that in the last legislative session and the legislative session before that, and it didn't happen. And then Jared Nadler, the head of the Judiciary Committee in the House, passed through the whole House an act that would have legalized marijuana, made it unscheduled entirely, and caused expungement of records. And that passed the entire House under Nancy Pelosi twice. And so they couldn't get together and pass it and send it to the president at the time. So now they say, and the DEA has for the first time ever said, yeah, we're going to allow it to be Schedule 3. But our opponents, Kevin Sabet at the Anti-Marijuana Smart group, that's their acronym. He says they're going to fight it in court and they're going to try to hold it up in court. So
Good.
knows how long that will take. But given that, I know criminal cases depend on the scheduling. So if it goes from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, people who are facing court will be facing a less serious crime. And the legislators there in Idaho have to realize that. Have you had a chance to interact with any people about how this is going to affect the change, if it in fact happens, is going to affect the
Well,
laws there in Idaho?
that's actually ironic. Reason why is because we have mandatory minimums for just about every drug here in the state of Idaho, regardless of whether it's a pharmaceutical, whether it's a plant, and cannabis right now is already treated as a Schedule 3 drug. When we look at sentencing, it is a non-narcotic Schedule 1 drug or Schedule 3 when it comes to sentencing, crime, and punishment here in the state of Idaho. So the movement to Schedule 3 doesn't actually change the way cannabis violations will be treated or handled in the state of Idaho. Trafficking certain amounts across, will continue to be the same problem. The issue is how do you license to transport and or sell under Schedule 3 as medicinal? That's really what it is. Schedule 3 admits to the medicinal uses and medicinal capabilities of cannabis. How do you license it so that you are a licensed, courier, cultivator, distributor, so that you're not in violation of the state law regarding, the management of a Schedule 3 drug.
Mhm.
So it's going to be interesting to watch how Idaho redefines it. Even if they don't legalize it in the same way, because they'll still arrest you for trafficking in Tylenol with codeine. It's a Schedule 3 drug. You're going to go away for 10 years if you got so much of it. Cannabis, it's a Schedule 1 non-narcotic, treated as a Schedule 3 drug. Even as a Schedule 3 drug, it's now just pairs itself with where it's already being sentenced at. So it's going to be a real tough call, especially in Idaho, because they've loved to arrest truckers just moving hemp. And it's, what was that, Paul?
We covered that on our show, how they were arresting truckers who were carrying completely non-psychoactive hemp from Oregon and Washington to Colorado for processing, and
Right.
the truckers sometimes spent a few months in jail.
Yeah. Now it's interesting. Yeah, the truckers. But one of the other thing that is interesting is most of the states it's legal to transport and carry cannabis or marijuana, as a courier. The irony is how many individuals, don't take the time to go around Idaho, despite the fact that, criminal punishment for trafficking large quantities, for moving large quantities through the state are rather severe.
That's
Um,
that's a very good point to digress to how we met. So an old friend of mine, one of my mentors, who I first met when I was 21 back in 1981, Dana Beal of the Yippies, an acolyte of Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. He was arrested back in early December, right during that big freeze when the temperatures were way below zero, because his car broke down on the interstate with a few dozen pounds of pot. They're near Twin Falls in a little county called Gooding, Idaho. So I have had Dana Beal call me from jails all over the country. He's been busted in all over the place. In fact, a lot of events started as free Dana Beal events, like the Great Midwest Marijuana Harvest Fest and the New York City Pot Parade, which has become a global parade with participation of almost 400 cities around the world. In Chile, they have like 600,000 people march sometimes for marijuana legalization. So Dana Beal was busted, and he called me from the Gooding County Jail and says, "What about the initiative here? Look it up online." So I look it up online and I see you and Jackie Winters. And he goes, "Get in touch with this Joe Evans. He's a veteran. We need to get him aware of Ibogaine. I've got to teach," because Dana has been the guiding angel of Ibogaine for ending drug addiction and Parkinson's for decades, to the problem of many other people in the marijuana and drug reform movement. But anyway, he said, contact you. Finally, we got contacted because Dana Beal from the jail cell called me and urged me to look you up. And now here we're doing a TV show. But he, like, as you mentioned, is a crazy old guy. He's like 77, and he was arrested with dozens of pounds of marijuana. And so he has been offered a total of a year in jail, for
Yes.
which, because he stayed in county jail, he'd get 2 months off. So it'd be 10 months in county jail. And he's already spent almost 2 months in county jail already. He was bailed out of county jail in March. A couple of activists, Don Wirtschafter in Ohio of the Cannabis Museum, a longtime friend and business associate of mine, and another fellow I don't know that well, Adam Ettinger in Washington, D.C., another marijuana activist. They signed for Eve and the Outlaw, which has to be the best name of any bail bond company I've ever heard of. In fact, that's how once I saw that name, that's when I contacted Eve and the Outlaw. And they were very supportive, and they have let Dana out, where even though he hasn't paid, even their normally bail bonds are 10%. Eve said they would take 5%. But just because Don Wirtschafter and Adam Eidinger signed that if Dana does not show up, they're going to pay $250,000 to the courts there. And because they signed that up, they let him out to try to raise funds. And in fact, we are still raising funds for Dana. And he had to appear in court back on May 16th, and he's got to be back there next week on June 11th in Gooding County, Idaho. He wants to get the trial pushed out. He wants to wait.
Right.
The scheduling for Schedule 3 goes into effect. I don't know how successful he'll be at that. It's not like he's got the money of Donald Trump to hire lawyers to file 1 million pages of documents to obfuscate everything. But he's going to be back there, and he just came to mind because you were mentioning people. I'm sure you were thinking of him too.
Yeah.
And you meet Dana there, fresh out of jail.
Yes.
I know I have a GoFundMe thing where I've been raising money for the bail bond company and Dana, and you've actually helped and acted as a conduit. So I will send you money on Cash App. You will give cash to Dana. And
Yes.
when I came there, I gave him from that GoFundMe. It wasn't my money, really.
Yeah. Now, Dana just happens to be one of the latest. We've had several people come through, celebrities. They come through with their brand of stuff, thinking they can just take a shortcut, just down I-84, and for whatever reason, something stupid happens.
His
You
car.
know, his car breaks down.
Right.
an accident, a tire blows, just random events. And next thing you know, there's an Idaho State policeman. They're checking on you, going, "Hey, how you doing? And what's that smell?" And Dana's got his entire story in the New York Times, and there's others as well. But this is one of those things, we know what the laws here in the state are. They're hardcore, they're hardline, laws with sentences, mandatory minimums here in the state. And part of the reason why they're still so hardline is because the level of money needed to legalize it has never truly entered the state of Idaho. We've never really seen that infusion of cash, of lobbyists, of organizers, that are able to exert the kind of pressure we need to see justice reform in this state, because let's face it, that's an awful lot of time for a relatively benign drug here. We use it for medicine, we use it for our health. People do not OD on it. We're running through an issue in the state of Idaho with heroin, meth, and what's the latest one? Yeah. And these are things that marijuana helps, cannabis help get people off of. These are things ibogaine helps get people off of. Microdosing on psilocybin helps repair the damage that's been done by an awful lot of these drugs, meth and heroin and fentanyl, and we're able to heal people, correct the trauma that has them looking for this, and we've never had the push here in the state of Idaho to really legalize right to try, to really decriminalize, the opportunities that created by simply growing your own medicine at home. The push has never been here. And our conservative, legislative body, which is fair, they're conservative. They don't want to see radical change. They don't want to see that overnight influx of, what the decriminalized drugs, medications and drugs and plants will do here in the state. They want to take it cautiously. They've seen what happens when you screw it up. They've seen what happens in California. They saw what happened in Portland when they did the decriminalization of personal use without the advantage of government funded clinics, without the advantage of alternatives, without the advantages of making sure that there's proper social support, for these individuals who are using these
Safe locations for the
right.
for people to go shoot their drugs up instead of, dying in a tent by the freeway.
Well, there's things about that, because you don't just want the safe house. You need therapists there.
Yeah.
You need social work. You
They've had
need that support network.
program like that in Zurich, Switzerland for
Yeah.
30 years now. And they've
Zurich,
done communities.
Portugal, both classic examples of how to do it right. There have been places here in the United States where we've half-assed it. That's what we did. We decriminalized, but we didn't provide a support network. We decriminalized and gave people spaces, but we didn't give them monitoring. We didn't give them safety. We didn't give them the ability to survive, the experience if they managed it poorly. So that's where we look at, how do we do it right? Well, rather than doing a partial job, like what we've seen in California, like what we've seen in Portland and Seattle, take the extra effort, provide those safe places so that people can learn to use, learn to test, learn to take care of themselves, so that they're using the right quantities, the right dosages, and they're not using tainted product.
Let me ask you this. If someone wants to support your effort. Let's hope and pray that there's some billionaire out there by chance watching this who thinks, boy, if only Idaho would change, it would change everything. They could come forward with some big bucks to help you out. How
Oh,
can
absolutely.
you?
Kindidaho.org. Okay, that's who we're kind. We're Idaho,
Right.
and we're an advocacy organization. Kindidaho.org. We have a donation page there. We have a volunteer page. Sign up, come help us collect signatures. Sign up, come help us table at events, meet people, talk to people about justice reform, about patient advocacy, about the benefits of decriminalization of nature, not just in Idaho, but across the United States. You know, for us, cannabis, the decriminalization of that is the gateway to decriminalization of all of nature's medicines here in the state of Idaho and across the nation. You know, I think we're going to be one of those states where we're able to come from behind and with the right people and the right funding, will be leading the nation in not just justice reform, but medical reform as well.
So you're working with Jackie Winter still? Are there other people you can talk about, or
Jackie Winters is my, big one. She's been around the longest. We have Sean Luoma, who lives up in Bayview, Idaho. He does an awful lot of work across the border in Spokane, as far as support, advocacy, working with partners, in that area. William Buchelman is currently doing an awful lot of volunteer work for us as far as our newsletter, some writing, some assistance with our webpage, and development on that. Right now, that's 4 of our core. And, that's another one of those things. We want people who are prepared to support this, who have a passion for it, in the same way that Jackie and I do, to be able to step in and help be, our right-hand people, help advocate and do what needs to be done, even if not for them, but to make sure that their loved ones get taken care of by advocating in the way that only someone who loves someone who needs cannabis can do it.
we briefly discussed my longtime friend and mentor and your new acquaintance Dana Beal as one of the more recent horror stories. Can you talk about how any specific patient horror stories from the drug war there in Idaho?
In this one's particularly tragic. We have a Air Force veteran. 2 years ago, he tried to get a medical marijuana initiative or law passed through our legislative body. This is an individual who is terminal with cancer. Has had his entire inside scraped out trying to remove it. Had his guts pulled out, set on the table, scraped his core, and then put everything back in and stitched him back up. And he carries around roughly $20,000 worth of meds in a briefcase, for his pain management program. And he has to carry his Narcan with him in case some portion of his pain management program tries to kill him.
Wow.
We continue to see the problem with, young children with tremors and seizures, whether it's from epilepsy or other things, that we know cannabis oil will benefit them, but their parents are afraid because it's still illegal, so they're using petrochemicals, to alleviate, and we know those are ineffective, inefficient. They don't provide the same level of benefit and the same level of relief. They don't provide the same pain management program. And one of the other things that we've ran into a problem with is our veterans. Our veterans know, what works for them, the edibles, the flower, the entourage effect. They go across the border, and it's like second they leave, second they come back across the border, there are certain people who get targeted, by the police because we can put them in drug court or veterans court or some other way to, milk them for their resources, milk them for money without putting them in the system. Which, of course, there's no room in that system anymore here in the state of Idaho. We have 8,000 beds in our prisons here in the state. We have 10,000 prisoners. More than 2,000 of those are nonviolent prisoners that are shipped to out-of-state for-profit prisons for management. I mean, these are our safest criminals. They didn't perform a criminal act. They didn't hurt anybody. They're nonviolent.
So there's like Alabama or something, some
right.
out
Texas and Arizona is usually where we end up shipping them. But I mean, still, that's 2,000 miles away from family, from their support network, stuck in a for-profit prison, that gets them work, that pays them pennies on the dollar, and charges them exorbitant fees in order to use the cafeteria or even be able to call and talk to relatives that are clear back here in Idaho. They don't have the support network. They spend 2 years, 4 years, 6 years in a prison 3,000 miles away from their support network. They get released, the whole trauma on top of trauma scenario. They get out and they slide right back into chemical use, whether it's cannabis, whether it's meth, heroin, they slide right back into it because it's what they know and it creates their comfort zone. And we do not have a path for recovery for them right now.
I noticed when our friend Dana Beal was in jail there in Gooding County, Idaho. It's not the state prison by any means.
No.
They gave him a tablet, and he was able to call people on this tablet, and people could call him once they registered with this interstate system called Getting Out. And you pay them money, and then you could actually video call with him in the Gooding County jail. But I also noticed in that New York Times article about Dana Beal that you referenced a little bit ago, that they interviewed the Attorney General of Idaho. And he said, if you come through Idaho, we're going to put you in jail, but we don't want you to do that. We don't want to waste our money locking you up. And we can't afford to do it. But if you do it, we're going to do it. Basically, that's what he said in the New York Times anyway. But are there any legislators in Idaho politics that are advocating for medical marijuana or?
Well, and that's the beautiful thing. We have a number of them on both sides. We just don't have enough of them. Ben Adams has been a strong advocate. He's a Republican over in Nampa, Canyon County. He's a veteran himself. He advocates for medical use. We have several other veterans that are on the Republican side of the House that advocate for medical use. We have, literally every one of our Democrats do. We have Thomas Matias, who's former Coast Guard. John Gannon, who's former Air Force, JAG, I believe. We have Melissa Wintrow, Alana Rubel. These are amazing Democrats from out of the Boise area here. We have a lot, but when it comes to, do we have enough of the 105 legislators to get it passed? No, we don't. We do not have the votes to create a medical program. We don't have the votes to create a decriminalization program. What we do have is once the Citizens Initiative passes, they don't have enough votes to recriminalize it.
Right. Yeah, you've got a solid majority with over 60% support for a medical bill there in Idaho. Just have to translate that into the money for an initiative. And in Idaho, you have to have so many signatures in various counties, right? What is the rule on signatures per county in Idaho?
Okay, it's not actually county, it's legislative district. We have 35 legislative districts, of which 18 need to meet a 6% threshold. So if 6% of the registered voters in a given legislative district, we qualify that district. We qualify 18 of them, and the balance of the signatures can come from anywhere else.
How many signatures do you need to put it up for a vote? Not just to, well, the number that you need to qualify and the number you need to overcome the invalid signatures. What do you think?
Okay, so we need 6% of the registered voters at the last general election. Right now, that comes in at close to about 70,000 signatures. Okay. We had an abysmal rate with signatures this time with roughly 30% of validity. This is again part of the training issue, making sure that the people who do the signature gathering are collecting from people who are registered voters. You have to be a registered voter, you know. And we've seen ballot initiatives here in the state get roughly 70 to 75% validity rate. And that's what we're expecting when we come back with our decriminalization bill. We're expecting that 70 to 75% validity rate as opposed to the 30%. Because we'll be more involved with our volunteers, we'll be more involved, and they won't be carrying around a stack of legal size paper. You know, it'll just be a nice 1 or 2 page signature. People want to sign it because it's easy to read, it's easy to comprehend. You know, they want to be able to carry their medicine with them. They want to be able to grow their medicine in their home. Above all, they want to be able to do it without registering with the state. You know, so we're going to have that validity. But when it comes down to it, we'll need roughly 100 to 120,000 signatures in order to make the validity rate for the 70,000 or so signatures we actually need.
I see. Okay. Well, to anyone out there watching who can help in any way, you want to reach out to kindidaho.org, right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
kindidaho.org. Well, we're almost out of time. I've been talking to Joe Evans of kindidaho.org. Would you like to say anything in closing, Joe? Just go right ahead.
Yeah, this is about medical choice. It's about medical freedom and bodily autonomy. We want to be able to use the medicine that works for us. We want to be able to use the medicines that work for our friends and family. And when it comes to medical choice, using the things that work for you, the things that work for us, you know, we want all of it decriminalized so there's no stigma associated with using it. This is patient advocacy and justice reform all rolled into one. And we're going to make it happen here. And Idaho is going to become the next leader in both of these issues in the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. Joe Evans, Kind Idaho. If you can, reach out and help them make a difference and help restore hemp. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you.